The Suicidal Japanese Drawing, Japan. In the age of the internet, urban legends have found new ways to spread, taking on a life of their own in the digital world. One such legend that has captured the imaginations and fears of many is the story of the suicidal Japanese drawing. This tale centers on a haunting image created by a teenage girl who took her own life shortly after posting the drawing online. The drawing itself is deceptively simple, a portrait of a young girl with large, sad eyes gazing directly at the viewer. At first glance, the image seems unremarkable, even innocent. But as the legend goes, those who look at the drawing for too long begin to notice subtle, unsettling changes. The girl's expression shifts, her eyes darken, and a faint, almost imperceptible smile begins to form on her lips. According to the legend, the girl who created the drawing did so while in a deep state of depression, pouring all of her sorrow and pain into the image. After finishing the drawing, she posted it on an online forum, where it quickly gained attention. But soon after, the girl took her own life, leaving no explanation except for the haunting image she had left behind. As more people viewed the drawing, strange reports began to surface. Some claimed that the girl's eyes seemed to follow them as they moved. Others said that the longer they stared at the picture, the more they felt a deep, overwhelming sadness, as if the girl in the drawing was pulling them into her despair. The most disturbing aspect of the legend, however, is the belief that anyone who stares at the drawing for too long will be driven to take their own life, just as the artist did. The internet, saturate with its ability to spread content far and wide, has turned this simple drawing into a digital curse, a modern-day hex that ensnares those who dare to look. Aiko was a young woman who came across the drawing while browsing online late one night. She was intrigued by the eerie reputation the image had gained and decided to test the legend for herself. She stared at the drawing for what felt like hours, waiting for something to happen. At first, Aiko saw nothing unusual, but then she noticed the girl's eyes. They seemed to have darkened, and her once neutral expression had shifted into something more sinister. Aiko felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature in the room had dropped. She tried to look away, but something compelled her to keep staring. As the minutes ticked by, Aiko's mind became clouded with a profound sense of hopelessness. She began to see flashes of the girl's face in the corners of her vision, even when she looked away from the screen. The girl's expression grew more menacing, her smile widening into a ghastly grin that seemed to mock Aiko's growing fear. Terrified, Aiko shut her laptop, but the damage had been done. The girl's face haunted her dreams, and she couldn't escape the feeling that she was being watched. The despair she felt grew stronger each day until she could no longer bear it. Just like the artist before her, Aiko took her own life, leaving behind only a note that read, "She wouldn't let me go." The legend of the suicidal Japanese drawing serves as a cautionary tale about the power of art and the dangers of delving too deeply into the unknown. In a world where images can be shared instantly and viewed by millions, this story reminds us that some things are better left unseen. The Baby in the High Chair, Norway. In a small, isolated village in Norway, there is a haunting tale that has been told for generations. It is the story of a couple who, eager for a much-needed vacation, left their baby in the care of a trusted nanny. But what should have been a peaceful getaway turned into a nightmare, one that still sends shivers down the spines of those who hear it. The couple, Lars and Ingrid, had been planning their trip for months. With both of them working long hours and little time to themselves, they were excited to finally have a few days to relax. They had arranged for the nanny, a young woman named Anna, to look after their baby boy, Eric, while they were away. On the day of their departure, Anna was running late. She called to inform them that her car had broken down, but assured them that she would arrive shortly. Anxious not to miss their flight, Lars and Ingrid decided to leave the back door unlocked so that Anna could get in once she arrived. They strapped Eric into his high chair with a snack and a toy to keep him occupied, kissed him goodbye, and hurried out the door. Hours passed, and Anna never arrived. Unbeknownst to the couple, a series of tragic events had unfolded. On her way to the house, Anna was struck by a speeding car and killed instantly. With no one else aware of the arrangement, no one came to check on Eric. Days later, Lars and Ingrid returned home, eager to see their son. As they opened the door, they were greeted by an eerie silence. The house was cold and still, and a sense of dread washed over them as they entered the kitchen. There, sitting in his high chair, was Eric, but he was no longer alive. The baby's body was bloated, his face pale and lifeless. He had died of dehydration and starvation, unable to escape the high chair or call for help. The couple's screams echoed through the empty house, their horror at the scene before them unimaginable. The villagers, upon hearing of the tragedy, were horrified and filled with guilt. They had assumed the couple had taken the baby with them and had not thought to check the house. The incident became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of community vigilance. Over time, the story of Eric's death took on a more supernatural tone. Some claimed that the house was cursed, that the spirit of the baby lingered there, trapped in the high chair where he had died. People who passed by the house at night reported hearing the faint sound of a baby crying, a mournful wail that sent chills down their spines. Others believed that Eric's spirit was not at rest because of the way he had died, alone, helpless, and abandoned. The once welcoming home became a place of fear and sorrow, avoided by the villagers after dark. Some even said that the baby's ghost would appear in the windows, his face pressed against the glass, staring out with hollow, lifeless eyes, as if searching for his parents who never came back in time. Lars and Ingrid, devastated by the loss of their child and the horror of the circumstances, were never the same. They sold the house and moved away, unable to bear the memories that haunted every corner. But even as they tried to leave the past behind, the story of Eric followed them. Wherever they went, the cries of a baby would sometimes wake them in the dead of night, a chilling reminder of the life they lost and the tragedy that had befallen them. The house where Eric died was eventually abandoned, falling into disrepair. Local children dared each other to approach it, to peer through the broken windows or venture inside, but those who did often returned pale and trembling, swearing they had heard a baby crying or seen the shadow of a small figure moving in the darkness. Years passed, and the house became known as the cursed house in the village, a place where only the bravest or most foolish dared to go. The legend of Eric's tragic death and the haunting that followed became ingrained in the local folklore, a story parents told their children to warn them of the dangers of neglect and the importance of keeping a close eye on those they love. Though the house eventually collapsed and was reclaimed by nature, the story of the baby in the high chair remains one of Norway's most chilling urban legends. It serves as a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the lingering pain that can come from a single, tragic mistake. To this day, the villagers say that on certain cold, quiet nights, if you stand where the house once stood, you can still hear the faint, sorrowful cries of a baby lost to the cruel hands of fate. Lake Lanier's Curse, United States. Lake Lanier, in northern Georgia, is a picturesque body of water with a dark history hidden beneath its serene surface. The lake, created by flooding entire towns and displacing thousands of people, has long been rumored to be cursed. Over the years, numerous accidents, mysterious drownings, and unexplained disappearances have led locals to believe that the spirits of those who once lived in the submerged towns are not at rest. The most famous story associated with Lake Lanier is that of Delia Parker Young and Susie Roberts, two women who disappeared in 1958 after their car plunged off the Lanier Bridge. For over a year, the women's whereabouts remained a mystery until a fisherman made a gruesome discovery. He found a decomposed body floating in the lake, missing 2 toes and both hands. The body was believed to be Delia Parker Young, though her identity was never confirmed. The mystery deepened when, many years later, workers dredging the lake for bridge construction found Susie Roberts' car with her remains still inside. The discovery sparked renewed interest in the lake's curse, with locals claiming that Delia's ghost now haunts the area. Visitors to Lake Lanier often report eerie encounters, particularly near the bridge where the accident occurred. Some have seen a ghostly figure in a blue dress, similar to the one Delia was last seen wearing, wandering along the shore. Others have heard strange noises, such as splashing water or disembodied voices calling out in the night. One summer evening, a group of teenagers decided to camp near the lake, eager to test the legend for themselves. They set up their tents close to the water, laughing off the stories they had heard. As darkness fell, the air grew heavy with humidity, and the lake, usually calm and inviting, seemed to take on a more menacing presence. The group sat around a campfire, the flames flickering in the wind as they shared ghost stories. Inevitably, the conversation turned into Lake Lanier's curse. They spoke of Delia and Susie, of the countless others who had met tragic ends in the lake's waters. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease began to settle over them. Around midnight, the wind picked up, sending ripples across the lake. The group grew silent, listening to the strange noises coming from the water. It started as a low moan, like the sound of someone in pain, followed by the faint splash of something moving in the lake. The teenagers exchanged nervous glances, their bravado fading. Then one of the girls, Katie, noticed something unusual. At the edge of the lake, where the water met the shore, a figure stood in the shadows. It was a woman, dressed in a long, flowing blue dress, her hair hanging down in wet strands. She was staring directly at them, her eyes hollow and dark. Katie gasped, pointing towards the figure. The others turned, their faces going pale as they saw the woman by the water. For a moment, they were frozen in fear, unable to move or speak. The woman took a step towards them, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were struggling against the weight of the water. Panic set in. The teenagers scrambled to their feet, knocking over the campfire in their haste to escape. They ran towards the cars, parked nearby, the woman's presence pressing down on them like a physical force. As they drove away, the figure by the lake faded into the darkness, leaving only the sound of splashing water in their ears. The group didn't stop driving until they were miles away from the lake, their hearts pounding in their chests. It wasn't until they were safely home that they dared to speak of what they had seen. But the encounter left them shaken, a reminder that the legends of Lake Lanier were not to be taken lightly. To this day, Lake Lanier remains a place of beauty and tragedy, its waters hiding secrets that may never be fully understood. Whether the curse is real or simply a product of fearful imaginations, those who visit the lake often leave with a sense of unease, as if they've brushed against something ancient and unforgiving. The last bus to Fragrant Hills, China. In the bustling city of Beijing, where modernity and tradition collide, there is an urban legend that has persisted for decades. The story of the last bus to Fragrant Hills is a tale of mystery, fear, and the unknown, passed down from generation to generation, each retelling more chilling than the last. The legend begins on a cold winter's night, when a young man boarded the last bus of the evening, heading to Fragrant Hills, a popular park on the outskirts of the city. The bus was nearly empty, with only a few passengers, a middle-aged man, an elderly woman, and the young man himself. As the bus made its way through the dark, winding streets, it stopped to pick up 2 more passengers. These new arrivals were dressed in long, flowing robes, their faces obscured by wide-brimmed hats. They moved slowly, almost unnaturally, and took seats at the back of the bus without uttering a word. The young man felt an immediate sense of unease. There was something off about the new passengers, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He noticed that the elderly woman kept glancing nervously at the robed figures, her hands trembling slightly. After a few more stops, the elderly woman suddenly stood up and accused the young man of stealing her purse. Startled, the young man protested his innocence, but the woman insisted, her voice rising in hysteria. The middle-aged man, who had been silent until now, advised the young man to get off the bus with the woman to resolve the issue. Confused and anxious to avoid a scene, the young man followed the woman off the bus at the next stop. As soon as they stepped onto the pavement, the woman grabbed his arm and whispered urgently, "I lied about the purse. Those men, they're not human." The young man's blood ran cold as he turned to look back at the bus, which was now pulling away into the darkness. He saw the robed figures through the window, their faces still hidden, but their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The elderly woman explained that she had felt an overwhelming sense of dread when the robed men boarded the bus. She couldn't explain it, but she knew that something terrible would happen if they stayed on board. The young man, still shaken, thanked her for saving him, but the fear lingered long after the bus had disappeared. The next morning, news spread throughout the city that the last bus to Fragrant Hills had gone missing. No trace of the bus or its passengers was ever found. Some say the bus had fallen into a ravine. Others believe it simply vanished into thin air. To this day, no one knows what happened to the bus or the people on board, but the story serves as a chilling reminder that not everything in this world can be explained, and that sometimes it is better to trust your instincts and get off the bus while you still can. The White Death, Scotland. In the misty highlands of Scotland, where the rolling moors stretch endlessly beneath a perpetually gray sky, there is a tale that chills even the hardiest of souls. It is the story of the White Death, a spirit so malevolent that merely learning of its existence can seal your fate. The legend warns that this vengeful entity, once a lonely young girl, despises life so deeply that she seeks to erase every trace of her own existence and anyone who becomes aware of her story. The White Death is said to have been a girl who, overcome by sorrow and hatred for the world, decided to end her life. In her final moments, she made a dark vow to ensure that no one would remember her, that her memory would vanish completely, as if she had never existed. To this end, she became the White Death, a spectral figure that haunts those who hear her story, driving them to madness and suicide. The tale begins with a group of teenagers who, during a weekend retreat to a remote cottage in the Highlands, stumbled upon the legend of the White Death. They found an old, dusty journal in the attic of the cottage, filled with cryptic notes and disturbing sketches. The final entry, scrawled in a trembling hand, described a pale figure with hollow eyes, dressed in white, who came in the night to claim the life of the journal's author. Curious and skeptical, the teenagers dismissed the story as nonsense, a ghost tale designed to frighten the gullible. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease settled over the group. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides. That night, the first of the group, a girl named Fiona, awoke to a soft whispering sound. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, more insistent, until it became a harsh, grating voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and saw a figure standing in the corner of the room, white as snow, with eyes like empty voids. The figure stepped forward, its pale hand reaching out toward her. Fiona screamed, waking the others, but by the time they reached her, the room was empty. Fiona was found huddled in a corner, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. She refused to speak, only muttering the same phrase over and over. "She's coming for me." The following day, Fiona was found dead, her face contorted in a final expression of fear. The remaining members of the group, now terrified, decided to leave the cottage immediately. But it was too late. One by one, they began to experience the same haunting visions, pale figures in the shadows, whispers in the night, and the overwhelming sense of being watched. As the legend goes, the White Death cannot be escaped. Once you hear her story, she will come for you, erasing your existence as thoroughly as she erased her own. The teenagers' bodies were never found, and their disappearance remains a mystery to this day. The legend of the White Death is a chilling reminder of the power of fear and the dangers of curiosity. In the quiet villages of the Scottish Highlands, where the wind whispers through the heather and the fog clings to the hills, the story is still told in hushed tones, a warning to those who dare to delve too deeply into the unknown. The Black Cadejo, El Salvador. Carlos Ramirez was known in the village of San Mateo as a man who lived life on the edge. He gambled, drank heavily, and had a reputation for ignoring the old superstitions that the villagers held dear. The most infamous of these was the legend of the Black Cadejo, a fearsome creature said to stalk the streets after dark. This spectral dog, with eyes that glowed like embers and fur as black as the night, was believed to target those who led immoral lives, especially late-night wanderers with impure intentions. Carlos had always laughed off the warnings about the Cadejo, mocking the villagers' fears as mere superstition. He was a man of the modern world, too practical for such nonsense, until one fateful night when his skepticism would be put to the ultimate test. It was a humid, stifling night when Carlos found himself stumbling out of the cantina after a particularly heavy drinking session. The village was eerily quiet, the only sounds the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. Carlos started down the narrow dirt road that led to his home, his thoughts clouded by alcohol. As he walked, Carlos felt a strange sensation, a tingling at the back of his neck, a sense of being watched. He brushed it off as drunken paranoia, but the feeling persisted. Then he heard it. the soft padding of footsteps behind him, almost too quiet to notice. He stopped, turned around, and saw nothing but shadows. Carlos chuckled nervously and continued walking, but the footsteps resumed, this time louder and closer. He quickened his pace, his heart beginning to race. The village was now far behind him, and the road ahead was shrouded in darkness. The footsteps behind him grew more insistent, and a low growl rumbled through the night air. Panic seized Carlos as he turned around again. This time, the black Cadejo stood before him, its eyes burning with a malevolent glow. The creature was massive, far larger than any dog Carlos had ever seen. Its teeth bared in a snarl that seemed almost human in its cruelty. For the first time in his life, Carlos felt true, unbridled fear. He turned and ran, the Cadejo close behind him, its growls echoing in his ears. No matter how fast Carlos ran, the Cadejo was always just a step behind, its breath hot on his neck. Desperation drove him into the dense forest, hoping the trees would slow the beast. But the Cadejo was relentless, its glowing eyes never losing sight of him. Carlos's strength began to wane as the forest closed in around him. His legs felt like lead, his lungs burned, but still he pushed forward. Just as he was about to collapse from exhaustion, he stumbled into a small clearing, his heart pounding with terror. The Cadejo emerged from the trees, its eyes fixed on Carlos. The creature seemed to savor his fear, its growls growing louder as it circled him. Carlos knew there was no escape, that his end was near. But then something extraordinary happened. Out of the darkness, another figure appeared, a second dog, this one white as snow, with eyes that shone like the moon. The white Cadejo, the villagers said, was the protector of the innocent, the only force capable of standing against its dark counterpart. The two beasts stared at each other, their growls filling the night air. In a flash, the white Cadejo lunged at the black Cadejo, their jaws snapping and teeth flashing. The forest echoed with the sounds of their battle as Carlos watched, too terrified to move. The white Cadejo fought with a fierce determination, driving the black Cadejo back into the shadows. When the battle was over, the white Cadejo turned to Carlos, its eyes softening as it regarded him. Without a sound, it vanished into the night, leaving Carlos alone in the clearing, trembling and shaken. The next morning, Carlos returned to the village, a changed man. The villagers noticed the difference immediately. The arrogance and bravado were gone, replaced by a quiet humility. Carlos no longer mocked the legends of San Mateo, no longer dismissed the old superstitions as mere stories. He knew now, as did the rest of the village, that some legends were more than just tales. They were warnings.